the real estate agent, as their guide. They drive to a suburban house complex. As the car moves on, the two men had already rejected the place inwardly. The streets are clean and tidy, but who wants to live in the same old house? But out of courtesy, the two men got out of the car with Jack to see the house. When they opened the door to number 9, the decor is simple and comfortable. It's fully furnished. It was ready to move in with just the right package, so they decided to think about it. The two men turn around and call for Jack, but Jack had disappeared. How can we talk about this? So let's go home. But after driving around for half a day, they couldn't find a way out. They went back around to room 9. They tried to get out their mobile phones to navigate. There was no signal. It was well into the night. The car ran out of fuel, and they didn't get out. They turned around and saw there was room 9 again. The light was still on inside. It looked like they were waiting for someone. Both of them were a little uneasy. When they got out of the car, Jenny started shouting. The only sound she could hear was her own echo. In such an empty place. How could you hear your own echoes in such an empty place? Fear and anxiety filled the two men's hearts. They had no choice but to go into the house. Tired and hungry, the two men opened the fridge and ate the fruit inside. Tom found the strawberries had no taste at all. After cleaning up a bit, the two of them lay down on the bed, but not a sound could be heard. The whole neighborhood felt like a cemetery. The next morning, Tom climbed to the roof of the house, and as far as the eye could see, there was only a dense collection of cottages of the same type. There was no end in sight. Tom was terrified. He took Jenny and set off in the direction of the sun, over the fences between the different houses, but until the sun went down, they were still not out of the cottage area. As they crossed a courtyard again, suddenly there was light coming through the window. Was there someone else? The two men hurried from the courtyard into the room. All they saw were the leftover strawberries they had eaten yesterday. This was still room 9. This was not an option. They came out of the front door in frustration. There was a box in front of the door, with all sorts of things and food. Obviously, someone must have put it here. Jenny shouted around, but no one answered. In a fit of rage, Tom set the curtains alight and, forcing the men to come out, he also tried to send a distress signal. The two men then sat in the doorway, watching the house burn, but it burned until dawn and no one came. The next day, the two men woke up in a foggy atmosphere. The house, which should have been reduced to ashes, had returned to its original state. This is unscientific. There is no explanation for this. At this point, a bizarre scene occurred again. A box appeared on the side of the road. It was opened. Inside was a baby. On it was written, "Please bring up the child, then set him free." They were frightened and scared, since there was no escape, so they raised the child as the box said. Perhaps when the child grows up, maybe when the child grows up, they'll be let out. Tom writes a distress call on the roof of the house, hoping that someone would see it, and so it was. They started to raise the baby. 3 months later, the baby was like a hypospray. It grew into a teenager in just a few months. It was really bizarre. Tom thought the baby was a monster. Every morning, the child would brush his hair to a shiny finish, standing in front of the bed of the two men, repeating what they had said, and the boy imitates them so well. He is a very good imitator. Every mealtime, the boy screams frantically waiting to be fed. He would not stop until the two men had prepared food for him. Tom didn't give up running away. He began to think, since there was no escape from the ground, why not try digging a hole? So he starts digging a hole in the yard. The ground here is a strange mixture of rubber and dirt. It looked like it had been made by hand. It was very difficult to dig. Every now and then he'd dig a hole to do a dance with Jenny. The boy joins in. The dance was not a good one and tripped Tom up. Then Tom slammed the boy to the floor. His patience with the boy is wearing thin. Trying to get an early night's rest. The boy is in high spirits and sings his nightly songs. The boy sings his nightly songs in high spirits. Tom starts to lose sleep all night. Tonight, Tom had managed to fall asleep. He was awakened by a strange noise. When he went into the living room, he saw the boy was watching television. Strange pictures, strange noises. He was watching it with great interest. Tom just wanted the boy to go to bed, but the boy didn't listen. Tom turned it off, and he turned it on, and it was repeated many times. Tom had to go back to his bedroom and put up with it. The next morning, the boy was screaming for food. As usual, Jenny scrambled to prepare breakfast, but Tom had had enough. Life was already a prison sentence, and he had to raise such a nuisance. Grabbing the screaming boy and shoved him into the car. Tom was going to starve the boy to death. If the person who tricked them into coming here cared about the boy, would have done something to stop it. But Jenny couldn't bear to do this to the boy. After all, he had done nothing wrong. There was a gap between the two. Instead of going home and suffering, it was better to dig a hole. Tom started digging the hole during the day. At night, he slept in the hole. All he did was eat and sleep and dig. He didn't talk to Jenny. At night, Jenny told the boy to go to bed early, to have good dreams. But the boy says, "What dreams? I've never had any dreams." When he heard this, Jenny suddenly felt uncomfortable. She began to talk to the boy with her heart. Maybe she could try to think of him as her own child. That day, the boy went out to play. He came back a few hours later with a book. Jenny looked through it. It was full of pictures from the television. The text was all incomprehensible to Jenny. She asked the boy where the book came from. The boy said it was a secret. So Jenny invited the boy to play an imitation game. He fell for it. He did, imitating the man he had seen today. It turned out that the boy was not a human being. Rather, it was a monster. Seeing this scene, Jenny finally agreed with Tom, so she and Tom got back together. A few months later, the boy, no, I should say the monster had grown up, no longer growling, but he still talks a lot, and he's always in the dark. This monster looks like Jack. He looks like him, but the couple had forgotten what Jack looked like. Something was wrong with Tom's health. Maybe he was tired from digging the hole, or it could be that the rubber was releasing poisonous fumes that were eating away at Tom's health. Jenny now regrets having stopped Tom. The grown-up monster takes the book out with him every day. Jenny sneaks up behind him and to see where he was going, but the strange thing is that, as soon as she reached the next intersection, the monster would disappear. All she could hear was the sound of his footsteps, but he couldn't catch up. Tom was digging his customary hole again. Suddenly he finds a body bag. He crawls out of the hole and collapsed on the side of the road. That's when Jenny came back. She tried to help Tom back to the house to rest, but the door was unlocked. The monster had taken over the house and wouldn't let them in. The two of them have no choice but to sleep in the car for the night. When they woke up, Tom was dying. Jenny had to ask the monster for help, but the monster said that,
Maybe it's time he was released.
And so, Tom died in Ginny's arms. The monster took the bag and put Tom in it, and threw him into the pit that Tom had dug with his own hands. Ginny was distraught. She too had finally made up her mind. The next day, while the monster was out, she grabbed a pickaxe and tried to kill the monster. The monster reacted in time. He screamed and lifted the floor to get in. No wonder Ginny lost him every time. She took the pickaxe and propped up the entrance. There was a room underneath. Ginny followed him immediately. She slid right down to the bottom of the room. There was a boy inside. There was a woman sitting in front of the dining table, crying in pain. It's been a year. At last Ginny saw a normal person. The woman looks at Ginny like she's a monster. Then Ginny is swallowed up by the floor. She reaches another room. The child in the room is a teenager. Then she is sucked away by the walls again. Arriving in a third room, Ginny sees a man. She was so frightened that she rolled down the stairs. She was back in room 9. Ginny got up slowly and came to the door. It was the same pit. It hadn't changed a bit. She collapsed to the floor in despair, and the creature is obliterating its own height record, and put the dying Ginny in a bag and into the pit with her. After filling up the car with gas, I drove out of the villa complex with ease. Back at the sales office, the previous agent, Jack, was old. The monster replaces Jack's badge with his own and puts Jack in a bag. He rolls them up into a ball and puts them in a drawer. Eventually, the monster becomes the new estate agent, ready to meet the next person to see the property.